With Mr. Jackie Haze. I'm Dr. Horace Huntley. We're presently at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. This is an interview for the Oral History Project of the Civil Rights Institute. Today is January 21st, 1998. Mr. Hayes, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and talk with me.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
You know, what I'd like to do first is just ask you a few questions about your family. Your mother and father, were they originally from Birmingham?
No, they were not. They were originally from Georgia.
Yeah, what part of Georgia?
Tarleton, Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother was from Harris County, Georgia.
Okay.
It was a small town there.
What brought them to Alabama?
I would imagine back in those days, the steel industry,
Mhm.
as you very well know, that there were very few jobs back in those days. So this was one of the towns that was booming back in those days in the steel industry. And my father came here and began to work for U.S. Steel.
Right. Okay. So you lived in what community?
I live in the Westfield area.
Westfield. Okay. Was your father at U.S. Steel?
He was at U.S. Steel at the time. That was a community that was owned by the steel company.
Right. Okay. So he worked in the mines.
He
I mean, the mills.
He worked in the mill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I was from the Winona area.
Okay.
So I'm familiar with that. We're opposite sides of the valley.
Yeah.
And your mother, did she work outside of the home?
My mother was a housewife.
Okay.
Yeah, she's a housewife.
How many brothers and sisters you have?
It was just two of us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just two of us.
You the oldest?
I'm the younger.
You're the younger.
Yeah.
A boy or girl?
Two boys.
Two boys.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what about the education that your mother and father had? How much education did they have?
It was very minimal education. I think maybe 8th grade.
Mm-hmm.
My mother finished 8th grade. I think that was as far as it was going at that time. And she also had an opportunity to even teach at the same school that she came out of.
In Georgia?
In Georgia,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And I'm sure back in those days, many people did the same thing. After you went to the 8th grade, you went back home and you worked the fields.
Mm-hmm.
But she was blessed to be able to work in the schools.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. Well, when she came to Birmingham, then
when she came to Birmingham, she after my father and my mother married, they moved to Birmingham, and my father worked in the mill, as I stated before, and she was took care of us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Did she ever take in any any domestic work or anything of that nature?
I think when we got up, I'm the youngest, so when I got to be about 16, 17, she started doing domestic work.
Mm-hmm.
Until I was about 16, 17, I never know my mother to work outside of the house.
Right. What about growing up in Westfield? You grew up in Westfield, right?
In Westfield.
What kind of community was Westfield? Describe the
It
community.
was a close-knit community. Everybody knew one another. And mostly, if you lived in that community, you either had to work for U.S. Steel or you worked in the mines. We had our own schools, had our own church. Matter of fact, we had our own community store. It was a close-knit community. There were a lot of values instilled in me back in those days. Anybody could chastise your child on that block or the next block or the next block. And I think during that time, most of the people were not highly educated people. They either worked, as I before stated, worked in the mines or they worked in the steel plants. And most of the women didn't work. So I think that gave us somewhat of an edge of being at home with our mother. So we kind of didn't get a chance to get exposed to a lot of things that we might have if our mothers were working.
A lot of negative things
Right.
that you would have been involved in
Right.
otherwise.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Now, you remember your first grade class? You remember when you first started the school?
I remember it just like it was yesterday.
What was it like?
It was fantastic. My first grade teacher, Miss Daisy Parker, I'll never forget her. She was an impact on my life. Also, Mr. McCain, who was the principal during that time, he was a powerful man. He was a positive man, even back in those days. And I'll never forget it. I'll never forget that.
What about the school itself? Do you remember what it, you know, the construction of the school? Did you have inside toilets?
We didn't have inside toilets, but there were wooden buildings. There was only from the first to the fourth grade. From the first through the third grade, there was a main building. And when you got to go to the fourth grade, you graduated to what they call a cottage. It's set away from the main building. It was 2 classrooms. Only we had 2 fourth grade classrooms. And they had a little playground that divided the cottage from the main building. The building itself was well maintained. It was well maintained. We had those cold stove heaters that sit in the middle of the floor, and it kept it warm. It was, to me, I thought it was a pretty good life.
What did you do after fourth grade?
After fourth grade, we went on to another school, which was called number 2.
What's field number 2?
No, sorry, number 1.
Okay.
It was just the opposite. Number 2 was from the first to the 4th. Number 1 from the 5th through the 8th. And as you went to that, it was about the same size as number 2 school. And we had an opportunity. We had we had a ballpark out there. So that's where the community had all the ball games, all of the different functions. And it was right there by number 1 school.
You mentioned ball games. Did you have a school team or a community team?
We had a community team. People like, he had left at that time, but I think it was Willie Mays. His father had played in that there. My father used to talk about Cat Mays. He played on that team too. Men like Sonny Terry, these are Pete Wilkerson. These guys were fantastic ball players. Fantastic ball players.
Now, were these teams, were they company teams? Were they supported by the company?
I really don't know. To be honest with you, I really don't know. I don't know whether they were supported by the company or not. They were a community team, and each community had a ball team back in those days. I'm sure you still probably contributed to it. You know.
I can remember those days too. We had a place in Renora called the schoolyard.
Yeah.
Where we played baseball, and that's where our team played.
Yeah.
And by the time that we came through, that I came through, the teams were not supported by the company by then, but they had been previously.
Okay.
And but like you say, each community had a team, and I remember going to Westfield, going to different places to play. But those were some festive days.
Yes, they were. They were good days.
After 8th grade, what did you do?
Well, after 8th grade, there was a big change in the community. They decided to tear down that community. So that whole community had to be moved. Everybody that lived in that community moved. They broke up the neighborhood. They went to different areas.
What was that like to see the neighborhood break up, and why was that necessary at the time?
I really don't know why it was necessary. Times were changing, and I don't know what it had anything to do with environment.
Were the plants closing?
No, the plants weren't closing. Just the communities were being done away with for expansion.
Did they use that property for something else?
Right.
What did they build?
They built another plant, an expansion to I think it was the tin mill, which was on the lower end of where I lived. I lived on the number 2 side. That was the number 1 side. There were several different rock quarries and slag pits that they used as storage back in those days.
Where did most people move to?
Different areas. And I think primarily the Bessemer and Powell area were one of the popular areas during that time for people to be moving to. It just so happened that we moved to the north side of Birmingham, which is a little, well, it's between the north and the south. It's called Illiton.
Okay.
And
Where in Illinois?
I live right on First Avenue. Right on First Avenue, 216 First Avenue North.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's in part of the industrial area now.
Right.
And I had an opportunity to stay there through high school.
Mm-hmm. So what high school did you attend?
I attended Parker High School.
Parker High School. Now, here you a young fellow coming out of Westfield. You've gone to number 2 and number 1 in Westfield, and now you go to Parker High School, which is the largest high school in the city at the time. What was that like?
It was traumatic. It was traumatic. I'd never seen so many kids in my life. I guess the first couple of weeks, I spent most of my time trying to find my way to different classrooms. It was the largest school I ever been in. I grew to love that school. I really loved the teachers there.
Did they close Westfield High School at the same time?
Not at the same time. I'm not sure how many years later they closed, but it did close.
But most of the people moving did not attend Westfield.
Didn't have the opportunity to attend.
Was that a sad day? That
It
you
was
not
a sad day. I had waited all my life to go to Westfield High School. As you know, we always had the best football team and the best band. But yes, it was a big disappointment to me. I look forward to going to Westfield.
Mm-hmm. But then you became the Thundering Herd, part of the Thundering Herd.
Absolutely.
What do you remember most about Parker? I mean, why was it so impressive? I know the numbers of students there. How was it otherwise different than you imagined Westfield to be?
There were a lot more things to be offered. Like we had mechanics and I think a poster shop in Westfield, maybe 1 or 2 other things. But at Parker, you were exposed to basically everything, from tailoring to carpentry, to auto mechanics, to mechanical drawing, most of everything you could think of during that time.
Mm-hmm.
And if you really had a real desire to learn, you could get a trade right there in high school.
Mm-hmm. Did you take a trade?
I took up carpentry.
Okay.
Yeah, I liked the carpentry at the time, and it helped me. Matter of fact, carpentry was one of the things. I learned to read a yardstick. I learned to read a rule, a tape measure, by taking carpentry.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever use it?
I had several opportunities to use it. We used to make, as you know, back in those days, we used to make little whatnots for the corners and things. But we graduated into making tables and furniture and stuff, and it was good. I enjoyed it.
Were you involved in any of the other extracurricular activities at Parker?
Sad to say, I wasn't. Making such a big transition from Westfield to Parker, as you know, as many positive things there was to offer, there were also as many negative things to offer also.
What were some of the negative things?
Well, you had it was something I never thought about, cutting a class. Every teacher knew you in Westfield, so you couldn't cut a class in Westfield. What we call having fun back in those days was, I guess it's pretty silly now, was being able to go across the street and buy a hamburger and drink a soda and sneak back on the school ground before school was out.
You were adventuresome, man.
Yes, very, very much so. Most of the guys didn't have automobiles in those days, I think very few people had cars.
Mm-hmm. How did you get back and forth to school?
My father passed when I was in 10th grade, I think it was. And that was one of his wishes was that I had a car. And so my mother bought me an automobile.
Mm.
And it was a good thing, and it also had its negative sides also.
Why was it good and how was it made?
Well, growing up in a household, we never had a car. My father never owned a car.
This was the first car
In the family,
Mm.
yeah. And my mother was doing domestic work at that time, and I would take her back and forth to work. And sometimes instead of going to school when after I'd taken her to work, I'd go back home, go to sleep, jump up late for school. And I guess had I not had that car, I would have been in school all the time.
What were the negatives?
That was a negative.
negative.
That was a negative to me.
Okay.
I always considered myself as a pretty level-headed person until I got in high school, and I found out that it wasn't. Because I made a lot of bad decisions in that time. I just thank God that I was able to overcome it. You know, I thank God that He loved me enough to wait on me. You know,
Did the car have anything to do with some of those?
it had a great deal to do with it. Great deal to do with it.
What were some of those decisions that you made? As it relates-
Experimenting with beer.
Mhm.
Back in those days, wasn't too many drugs around, you know.
Right.
So, and those were some bad decisions. I think I had a wreck once and cost my mother a great deal of money to get the car fixed. And during that time, I had no idea the type of pressure I was putting on her.
Mhm.
But as I said before, I just thank God that He loved me enough to keep me and wait on me till I came to myself.
How much older was your brother than you?
There's a family difference there.
So he was out of high school
Right
now.
now.
You said that you would take your mother to work and then you'd come back and try to get some sleep in.
Right.
Where did she work then?
My mother worked in Homewood at the time.
Mhm.
She worked for a family over in Homewood off Shady Terrace.
Mhm. But you would always take her over and
Always
then
take
you
her
go back
to
and
work,
pick
go
her
back
up.
and pick her up.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
I remember, excuse me, that the guys that had cars in high school were usually more popular ones.
Well, yeah, and that had a lot to do with it too. Had a lot to do with it too.
Now you where were you in 1963? Were you at Park at that time?
63, yeah, just started Park.
Just started Park, so you were a
60
freshman.
freshman.
Mm-hmm. And of course, in '63 was the year that of the demonstrations. Were you at all involved?
The first opportunity to get involved was in '63 when we went downtown and marched in demonstrations. When they was using the fire hose and the dogs in the park.
Tell me about, do you remember the very first time that you did it? Were you at school that day? Because I know that I've interviewed some people and they went to school, but then they left school, and some others, once they left home, they simply didn't go to school, they went directly downtown. What was your experience?
Well, mine was a little different. I went to school. That particular day was, now it seems a little cloudy. But I do remember hearing the commotion on the outside of the school, because during those times, Parker had the walls up in the school. And we were told not to leave the classrooms. We were told not to leave the school grounds. But it was such chaos at that time, we left the classrooms and we went out.
Why did you leave the classrooms?
Because you could hear the people on the bullhorns saying, "Come on and join us."
Well, there were people outside the school
Right.
that were attempting to get the students to come out and join them. So you all as students decided to join.
Right.
Was that due to the people outside, or were there people inside as well? Were there student leaders who were enticing other students?
Very few,
Mhm.
very few, very few. Most of us knew what was going on at that time, in the city. We knew the turmoil. We knew about the injustices that were going on, but we were paralyzed. We didn't know what to do about those things at that time.
Mhm.
So the first opportunity that came along that our voice could be heard in whatever way possible, we took advantage of it.
Were teachers, the principal, who was Mr. Johnson at the time, were they attempting to get you not to participate?
They asked us not to leave. They explained to us that if we left, there would be consequences. They never told us what the consequences were. They did tell us there would be consequences if we left the school. And I think basically you had to make up in your own mind as to whether you wanted to take a chance, regardless of what those consequences were.
And you made the
I
decision.
made the decision to go.
Mhm. Did most of the students that day leave school?
Most of the students made the same decision.
How did you get then from Parker to the area of the demonstration? Because you're going down, I assume, to the church, 16th Street.
Right.
How did you get from the church, from the school to the church?
If I remember correctly, we started on 3rd Street, which is the side of Parker High School. We everything kind of centered around the Calder Field at that time. We all went out and there were gates on each side of that field, which the school buses came from. And the guys would talk to us on a bullhorn on the outside of the fence. We still couldn't get out. The only way we could get out is climb over the fence. Okay? Or push the fence down. I can't remember how it happened, but I remember there was a big surge in the crowd. And by the time I got to the forefront of that crowd, the fence was laying down. So we all proceeded to walk to the streets. Then we were told to stay in the street.
By the people on the bullhorn.
Right.
Mhm.
And we marched from the school to downtown. Somewhere in that transition, because we were on 8th Avenue. Either we made the turn after we got on maybe about Seagull. I can't remember exactly how, but we ended up on 5th Avenue.
Mhm.
5th Avenue and 16th Street.
5th Avenue, 16th Street.
Right.
Okay. Did you make it to the church?
We made it as far as that corner.
As far as you made it?
We made it as far as that corner. Many of us, some of them I'm pretty sure made it to the church.
Mhm.
But by the time we got to that corner, that was turmoil. It was fighting in the park.
Fighting in the
In
park?
the park.
What kind of 40-minute fighting?
By that time, there were dogs in the park. Okay, the police was there.
Mhm.
There were people throwing bottles and rocks. And I don't know what we expected when we got there after leaving school. But I would say most of us were traumatized by that when we got there and saw what was actually happening.
Mhm.
And we just really didn't know what to do after that.
What did you do?
I remember standing there on that corner and looking at that park, saying, God, what have I got myself into?
Mhm.
And at the same time, I'm thinking, well, this is a sacrifice. Even at that age, I'm thinking this is a sacrifice. And this has to happen because what has been going on has to change. And I didn't know at the time, that if you expect a change, then you have to do something about it, But I now recognize that whatever part that we played in bringing about a change in Birmingham was important. You know, if an individual just marched, if an individual decide not to buy from a store, if an individual decide not to ride a bus, whatever part you played was important.
There were, I'm sure Park at that time was probably more than 2,000 students.
I would say so.
So you had quite a contingent, I'm assuming, that marched in the direction of 16th Street Baptist Church.
Right.
You only made it to 15th,
16.
and
Yeah.
5th. Okay. So you were really right there at the park.
We were right there at the park.
So what happened to all the people there when they saw what was happening? Were the fire hoses and the dogs?
Fire hoses and the dogs were there. But doing that, by the time we got there, there was an influx of people coming from different directions.
Mm-hmm.
So the people that I was with just kind of scattered. And I'm sure we lost some doing that march, you know, en route to 16th Street. Most of the people went on over to the park. Some went to the right, which would be going away from the park.
Right.
Okay.
Going to a Fourth Avenue.
Right, going to a Fourth Avenue.
Hmm.
Some tried to go up Fifth Avenue. But if I'm not mistaken, there was some police stopping you from going
Right.
any further than 16th Street. They didn't want you to cross 16th Street. Okay. So that's primarily what stopped us. Because had not somebody been there to stop us, we all would have over in the park.
Right.
But that was an unforgettable day.
Do you remember where you went?
I'll be honest with you, there was a complete blank. I don't even know how I got home. But I recognized the only way I could have gotten home was walk. During those days, you know, there weren't cars. We didn't have any cars. So the only thing that I can remember was the impact of seeing that many people together and seeing the water hoses and the police officers and the motorcycles running up and down the sides, up and down on each side of us. It was something to go home.
What was your reception when you went back to school the next day?
I'm trying to think, did we go back to school the next day? I
Were
really,
you expelled from school? Or
no, we weren't.
you were not expelled.
No, we were not expelled from school.
Do you remember teachers or anyone saying anything about your participation after you returned to school? Do you remember your talking with other friends and classmates about the experience?
I remember the anger that was expressed when we talked about it. I remember the hurt that was expressed when we talked about it. The only thing I can remember is what could we do? What was the solution? How long would this last? Where do we go from here? You know, what will my life be like 3 years, 4 years from now?
Being a freshman in high school, you had the other 3 years to go through school. Were there ever another opportunity for you to participate in the demonstration since that?
67 or 68, I'm not sure. I believe it was 1960, 1967. It was 67, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I know we participated in another march from
From the school?
right, but I'm just not sure what year it was.
Was it as massive as the?
No, not as fast as that, no. I'm not
Do
sure.
you remember what it was about?
I was going to say Dr. King, but Dr. King was assassinated in '68.
Yeah, he was assassinated.
So I wasn't there in '68, you know.
So was it 67 then? If you were a freshman in 63, you would have finished in 67.
Right. Yeah. But I don't remember why we left school.
I know in 65, you had the Selma March.
I remember Selma March, but we didn't, you know.
Right. But that was another time that you don't really remember
I don't remember.
what it was about.
Right.
Well, that's interesting because that is a period that when you look at it and see what was actually happening,
Right.
that would, again, mobilize students to be involved in the movement.
It was either 66 or 67. I remember talking with one of the secretaries at the church about it, and she recalled that time because she said they left school, but she didn't remember, she didn't leave school in '63.
Mm.
You know, that was a little too
Right.
big for her, she said. She went to Reno.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, 66 now, this is the period of Black Power and the
I remember that.
Afro hairstyles.
Remember that.
66 and 67, the Black Panther Party was developed in 66. You had the cities all around the north that were going up in flames at that particular time, but that didn't happen here.
No. If something happened where we had another chance to march, but I don't remember what it was right now.
Well, when you finished high school, what did you do?
When I finished high school, that was a very difficult time for me. My father passed in '66. '66, I think it was, yes. And I began to explore some other things when I finished high school. Some things that I regret today, you know. And
Like what?
I got in some trouble. 18 years old.
Before you left school or after you had finished high school?
Right after I finished high school.
Mm-hmm.
And it changed my life dramatically. I regret today that I had to go that way. And I think now that maybe something good did come out of it because my life changed after that. Okay. 1970, that was I had a kind of awakening. I began to set goals for my life, which I'd never done before. I got married in '72, so that matured me a lot. And I decided that it's got to be something better in life than what I've been doing those last year or so. And I began to work for a company, a fabricating company in '72.
Did you work after high school?
Right.
Did you go to work
Right.
with the fabricating company?
No, I didn't go to work till 1972.
So you didn't go to work until
To
70?
this particular company, I did odd jobs like waiting tables, something like that. But the first real job I had was in 1972.
You know, when many times when young black men get out of school and have little or nothing to do, there seemingly is that negative that sort of draws them. And I think that the experiences like you had and like I've had, and others may see this at some point, that may be able to help them to really, make some decisions like you made in '72. I think that's important for us to, at least share those things because
we are not alone.
Right. I think my mind was basically made up in 1970. I didn't meet my wife till 71, and we were married in 72. So that changed my life. My wife was involved in church. I was not. So we were married now for 26 years. And I saw a side that I'd never seen before. She came from a close-knit family, which was much larger than mine. My family was not a large family. Her mother worked, her father didn't. My father worked, my mother didn't.
It's reversed.
Reverse. So there were some things that we had to adjust to. But the basic thing was make it up in your mind that you wanted to be a positive role model for your community. Back then it was kind of difficult. There was little money. And you had to make a decision.
Prior to that, had you been involved with the law enforcement agencies? Did you get into that kind of trouble?
Yes.
You want to talk about that?
Well, 68, I was convicted of a felony. I'd never been in trouble before. And I wish I could say, well, I could blame it on somebody else, but we make our own decisions, regardless of how young we are. And every decision we make, there's a repercussion behind it, whether it be good or bad. And I made a bad decision. And I ended up being a victim of a felony. And as a result, I lost about 18 months of my life. In confinement. I had a chance to reevaluate my life in confinement. And back in those days, there was very few positive role models. I'm sad to say that, but it was. I grew up in a community where most of the guys wanted to be a hustler. And that's the part that I had seen all my life. But
And that's what you were trying to emulate?
During that time, yes. Getting a chance to read a little after being in confinement, I experienced that there were a lot more in life to that we did have positive people, role models. We did have men that were responsible, taking care of their families. We did have men who spent time with their children. We did have men that come home at night. Okay. And after getting out and trying to make amends, my basic thing was to take care of my mother. I got now. My mother was a very strong person, but she suffered a lot too. And that was my goal, was to take care of my mother. I didn't have the idea that I would be the woman that would take that away from my mother. After getting out and meeting my wife and getting married that next year, so my life changed. I was put in around different class of people, people that had jobs, people that had gotten their degrees, had put on scholars, gotten their degrees, and had professional jobs. And there was a part of me that said, if I raise a child, the child has to go to school, stay in my house.
So did you have children?
Right, yes, we did. I have a daughter, I have some stepsons, 3 stepsons. The oldest one was about 9 years old at that time. And I put it into them that there was a prerequisite for staying in my house. You had to go to school, finish high school. So all of them went to college. All of my kids, my youngest daughter. My daughter is young, she's 24. She graduated from A&M in 1996. And that was, to me, was the ultimate thing in my life, was to see that they didn't make that same mistake, to be that positive role model for them, to let them know that there's another way, that you have the same opportunities anybody else has, but you have to do something.
Choices. Yeah.
Let's go back to choices, right?
Yeah, well, that's great. That's a good story, because what you were saying is that you made a mistake, right? And you paid for that mistake. And then you made another decision after paying that price, because the price really is, what you get for it is really not sufficient enough. So what you need to do is to then set that example for someone else. And that's what you're saying. Yeah, that's great.
We were married for 3 years, and I was never really active in church until about 81, 82, and had an opportunity to meet a couple and talk with them, and it made a tremendous impact on my life. Tremendous impact on my life. And that helped me to establish higher goals in my life.
So where do you work now?
I'm retired now.
Oh, you're retired.
Early retirement, yeah. 94.
Did you work for the same company?
Everything right. Yeah.
Okay, well, what you've done, you've helped me to establish a pattern, just showing your beginnings in Westfield. Right? That's very significant, because many of us began in that manner. And then you migrated from the county into the city, right into the very urban area, and attended Parker, and then went through this whole urban kind of setting that has led you to really understand from whence you come, and then to set examples for others. I appreciate you taking the time
I thank you for being here.
coming to do it.